Timothée Chalamet is reading feminist literature. Kaya Gerber just started a book club, and your ex just sent you a Joan Didion quote. All of your favorite influencers are seemingly moving from TikTok and YouTube to Substack, and quite frankly, your phone addiction is becoming more and more embarrassing. Long-form content seems to be the new cool, but only for the elite and people who have the time and effort to be able to engage. Literacy rates are at an all-time low. It feels like we're all struggling to spend time offline more so than ever. Mental health crises, we're facing a loneliness epidemic, and we can pin pretty much all of these crises to social media. As a result, the appearance of those who can engage in offline activities seems to carry an almost aspirational and out-of-reach coolness quality.
Oh, is it showing? Oh, I hate when my feminist literature is sticking out of my back pocket.
In this episode, we're unpacking the rising desire to engage in reading and long-form content despite declining literacy rates and increasing phone addictions across the world. From the Diving Board is a show hosted by me, Charlie Chats, dedicated to decoding digital culture by unpacking the hidden politics behind the screen. And we're back, yet again. She's back. If you have been watching my videos, you would know that we're in a slightly different location today, which was for a number of different factors. First of all, the lighting in my other location needs some serious work. Some serious issues are happening there. It was flickering, not the vibe. I am using natural lighting again though, so this time round, if there is a lighting problem still, I apologize. That's a you problem, not me. I just can't fix it this time. We're on a tight budget, ladies and gentlemen, so none of this crazy business with the lighting things, okay? We're in a comfy position today in these lovely chairs, and I have my performative books for my performative reading episode because I just thought that would be fitting. Anyway, today we are talking about a really random topic. I came across this TikTok on and it really inspired the video.
I think not having an online presence will be one of the biggest signifiers of wealth and somebody's socioeconomic standing over the next couple of years. We're already starting to see signs of this, but two recent news articles or things that I've heard recently really have sparked that. One was a recent thing that I heard on NPR a couple of days ago, where it was talking about how a lot of legacy media outlets that previously dropped their print media are now slowly coming back, albeit in still a very reduced form. Second thing that I just read today was a Caitlin Tiffany article from The Atlantic where she talked about how she went to essentially like a deprogramming, a reclaiming of your attention. But this was a 6-week course that she took in Brooklyn. The course cost $600. And the gist of the course was essentially just like how to not be on your phone, how to reclaim your attention.
Let's dive in. In February of this year, Kaya Gerber told British Vogue that reading is so sexy in relation to her new book club called Library Science. In an article by The Guardian, journalist Chloe McDonnell relayed that in 2023, 669 million copies of physical books sold in the UK, which is the highest rate ever recorded. She continues in the article to say that research from Nielsen Book Data highlighted that it's print books that Gen Z are favouring, accounting for 80% of purchases from November 2021 to 2022. Libraries are also appearing to have an uptick in Gen Z users who are favouring their quiet over noisy coffee shops. In the UK, in-person visits are up 71%. And coincidentally, it really feels like Harry Styles, Jacob Elordi, Kendall Jenner, Addison Rae, Timothée Chalamet, to name a few, are all really jumping on this reading and book bandwagon as well. It feels like it has a slightly disingenuous air to it. I mean, come on, that photo of Addison Rae walking down the street holding Britney Spears as The Woman in Me, appearing to read it as she was walking down the street. I love it. Iconic imagery. But Addison, we are seeing right through that. And what I think is so interesting is I think Addison knows we know she's not reading the book. The appearance of performative reading, it almost has this added layer to it that we're all in cahoots. We all know that it's performative, and yet it still has this aesthetic attraction to it. Now, I've got to give Kendall Jenner her credit where it's due. That picture of her on a yacht reading a book where it's got green post-it notes all throughout it, I think we can all say that probably was read by her. But after seeing all of these celebrities really start posting photos and get papped with books in hands and in pockets and wherever else you can accessorize with a book, this discussion of performative reading really took hold of the internet for a little while. Being a bookworm has become a sort of aesthetic, a marker of identity, an indicator of intelligence, which funnily enough doesn't really carry the same strength when it's obvious that you're not actually reading the book, but alas, I digress. Significantly, it also suggests a propensity to be offline. It indicates that you've managed to break your phone addiction and opt for an activity that provides you with way less dopamine for the first 5 minutes of consumption. In an article for the New York Times, Terry Nguyen, who's a contributing editor for The Dirt, on the topic of performative reading, said the following: "Books, like the clothes you wear or the car you own, are symbols of a person's tastes, of their aesthetic and intellectual sensibilities. In the digital age, there is more social value a person or a celebrity can cultivate in appearing well-read or knowledgeable about best-selling titles or popular authors." And it's not only books that seem to be causing this online craze right now. It seems that long-form content and reading in general on platforms such as Substack are also becoming really, really, really popular. I mean, it was only a few months ago that I actually learnt what Substack was, and I'll admit I was very, very late to the bandwagon, but it really felt like there was this intellectual club happening with all of my favorite YouTubers and TikTokers and influencers. It's kind of like a blogging app. Substack writers basically send newsletters to subscribers. In October of 2024, Substack had 35 million users and 3 million paid subscribers. I'm of the camp that any reading, whether performative or not, is great. If you're inspiring people to pick up a book instead of your phone, I think that's a wholly good thing. But what I find really, really interesting is the fact that this phenomenon is occurring when literacy rates are genuinely declining at a rate that no one really expected, and phone addictions are on the rise as well. Are we promoting reading and by default improving literacy rates by encouraging the younger generation to opt for a book instead of their phones? Or are we simply promoting the aesthetic of reading and leaving kids that are struggling to read by the wayside? If it is an aesthetic, why is it catching on so much? So let's talk about brain rot culture. This year, brain rot was actually named the Oxford University Press Word of the Year, which it just feels kind of sad. However, the reason I bring this up is because it actually has kind of interesting origins. Definition of brain rot, before I get ahead of myself, is the supposed deterioration of a person's mental or intellectual state, especially viewed as the result of overconsumption of material, considered to be trivial or unchallenging. So contrary to popular belief, the word actually has origins in 1854, when author Henry David Thoreau wrote a book called Walden. In it, he discusses this propensity for British culture to oversimplify and devalue complex ideas. The president of Oxford Languages actually said the following about the word brain rot: "I find it fascinating that the term brain rot has been adopted by Gen Z and Gen Alpha, those communities largely responsible for the use and creation of the digital content the term refers to. These communities have amplified the expression through social media channels, the very place said to cause brain rot. It demonstrates a somewhat cheeky self-awareness in the younger generations about the harmful impact of social media that they've inherited." And I think that's pretty on the nose. We're experiencing brain rot due to the absurd and ridiculous level of content that we're seeing on our feeds that are only on our feeds because we're the ones creating it, promoting it, and sharing it with each other. But it's not just the fact that the content we're consuming is particularly bizarre. According to USC professor Dr. Julie Albright, she says that TikTok shares the same principles that make gambling on slot machines addictive. It's called random reinforcement. In a study that looked at brain scans looking at Chinese students who were using a TikTok equivalent, it actually found that the same part of the brain that is linked with addiction was engaged when they were using this TikTok equivalent app. The article continued, "As a result, the average TikTok user spends 95 minutes per day on the app. In 2022, the optimal level of TikTok videos to maximize user engagement was between 21 and 34 seconds. Now stay with me for this because this is wild. If we take the 95 minutes of screen time per day and divide it by the optimal length, the average TikTok user could be consuming between 167 to 271 TikToks per day, if not more. Our increasingly short attention spans, perpetuated by apps such as TikTok, are leading to an underconsumption of nuanced information. Our For You pages seem to be so heavily aligned with what we like and what our interests are that when we see things that are outside of our echo chamber, we almost get mad. This reminds me of a story that Hannah Ferguson of Chic Media often refers to, which is called the bean soup theory. Stay with me on this one. Essentially, someone posted this TikTok on... Oh my God, I keep saying that. Someone posted this TikTok on TikTok. Someone posted this TikTok where they basically showed a recipe for a bean soup. It had like 15 different types of beans in it or something. Anyway, much to the creator's dismay, this recipe somehow found itself into the ultimate bean haters algorithm, who decided to then comment on the video, "What if I don't like beans?" What this reaction to this video shows is not only is it like hilarious, but also it shows the sheer level of expectation that we have for our algorithms to give us exactly what we want, to the extent that we genuinely expect our algorithm to know the foods that we like and dislike. Now, obviously, many people would have simply scrolled on, but I think this highlights a sort of almost level of entitlement that we have over our algorithms. When our algorithm starts showing us content that doesn't fit in our general echo chamber, it feels like a betrayal. It's not only our attention spans that are suffering, but also our literacy rates. Jonathan Haidt wrote an article for The Atlantic, which was called "End the Phone-Based Childhood Now." In it, he quoted the following statistics. In the US, according to the nation's report card, scores in reading and math began to decline for US students after 2012, reversing decades of slow but generally steady increase. PISA, which is the major international measure of educational trends, actually shows that declines in math, reading, and science happened globally, also beginning in the early 2010s, which just so happens to link with the rise in social media as well. And it's not only that young people can't read, but they don't want to. In November of this year, the Australian National Literacy Trust published that only a third of 8 to 18-year-olds actually want to read in their spare time or choose to read in their spare time. This has actually been the lowest that has been ever recorded in the Literacy Trust's 19 years of surveys, and it has halved since 2016. So in 2016, 2/3 of kids still chose to read in their spare time. Only 8 years on, only a third. I mean, I wonder why. It's kind of obvious, right? And of course, these statistics are also way more significant among marginalized communities as well. If we're spending 95 minutes per day on apps like TikTok, we don't exactly have the time to opt for a book either. Terms such as chronically online and brain rot highlight that social media users are hyper aware of the dangers of being on social media and being online. Currently, it almost feels like if we had the choice, we wouldn't be online as much as we are, if at all. Online discourse about doom scrolling and its negative effects have engulfed apps like TikTok. And yes, it's great to raise awareness on these apps, but it shows that the users are really concerned about their own welfare and well-being because of being on the app. Many of us are logged on, but desperately trying to log off and find something that will give us the same level of satisfaction and enjoyment as the crazy levels of dopamine that an app like TikTok gives us in the short term. And I also think we're just starting to catch on to the sheer level of nuance that we're missing out on and knowledge that we're missing out on by just consuming short form content. I mean, I know many of us do consume other forms of media as well. I mean, you're watching a video essay, so you must be at least interested a bit in internet culture and trends, or just more nuanced takes on things in general. I think we're starting to catch on what just consuming short form content misses out on, and that is more nuanced conversations, greater knowledge, experiencing perspectives other than our own in a constructive and well-balanced way. We seem to be craving substance over fleeting dopamine hits. And I think what adds to this is the way that we've seen how this lack of nuance and lack of deep understanding for various topics can seep negatively into our real lives. For example, the way that online oversimplification of the election and different candidates' points of view really affected the overall outcome of the election. And although we are all kind of aware that one of the main pieces of advice that healthcare professionals are giving us, especially when we're struggling with mental health, is to get offline, it's not that simple when our lives are so intertwined with the digital world. It feels really out of reach. The digital detox and all things associated with it, including reading, seem to carry this aspirational quality due to the sheer level of difficulty that it is to get off our phones. When I was researching for this video, I kept coming across the term pseudo-intellectualism, and I think it's quite an interesting way of looking at this topic as well. Essentially, it refers to the act of positioning yourself as highly knowledgeable or intellectual in a given area of knowledge without necessarily having the qualifications to be so. So an example would be people positioning themselves on TikTok to be an expert in a given field when they don't really have the experience or qualifications to speak on it. Now, I don't mean that anecdotal evidence or just giving your personal opinion on things is bad. I mean, look at me. My whole experience online is just giving my opinion without, I'm researching, but I don't have like an academic PhD in what I'm talking about. I think there's value in that too. In a video by Oli Sunvia, she spoke about how in the science world and in academia, there is a major lack for anecdotal evidence because usually scientific evidence is prioritized. And so consuming information and opinions from other people online simply based on their personal experiences can be really, really valuable to understand different concepts. But it does become a problem when people are pretending that they have more knowledge than they really do and not really highlighting that they actually don't have sufficient knowledge to be telling people what to do or to be giving advice, for example. I mean, how many times has someone said in conversation, oh, I read this article, and they're actually just referring to a TikTok? Or how many times do you just kind of absorb information on TikTok without fact checking it first on Google? I do both of those things all the time, and writing these video essays has really made me highly criticize every piece of information that I receive because I feel like I have this responsibility to make sure what I'm saying has some backing. That's why I have so many references in these videos, because I never want to say something that's not backed by research. But the way that TikTok is designed means that we're not going to go and check the references. We're just going to take it and move on. We're bombarded with so much information. Think of those potentially 271 videos we're consuming every day. It means we kind of experience this information overload, right? Like we come away with all these random facts and we don't retain all of it, but it's really hard to remember whether or not that fact that you just learned about came from TikTok or Google or a journal article or a friend. The line starts to get really blurry. I feel like short form content means that we kind of cut out the important parts of logic and theorizing when we're talking about complex topics, and it can lead to the oversimplification of complex topics like good old mate Thoreau was talking about back in 1854. He knew what was up. One of the most valuable pieces of knowledge that I learned at university is to make what you're saying and make what you're writing legible to the general public, to the average person. Because otherwise, what's the point? If you're just trying to impart knowledge on other people that have this really higher level understanding of the world and academia and big words, you're not actually really doing much, right? Like it's only going to other people who already think like you. So the only reason you're using these crazy big words is to mark yourself to everyone else that you are an intellect. This to me feels really similar to performative reading. It's foremost an aesthetic. But why is this aesthetic gaining so much traction right now? Why is it so popular to appear smart and intellectual? So to unpack the attraction of this kind of reader aesthetic or offline aesthetic, you might describe it as, I've split it into 3 different sections. Firstly, we're talking about literacy rates. Secondly, we're talking about class and leisure time. And thirdly, we're talking about health and the wellness industry. So let's have a look at literacy rates. Reading is undeniably cool right now, arguably way more so than when I was a kid in the early 2000s. I was such a bookworm. I genuinely thought that I was going to write a book by the age of 11. I remember my teacher, I must have been 10 because it was when I was in year 4, and my teacher gave us this book to read, clearly trying to inspire us, and it was written allegedly by an 11-year-old. Now at the time that was like, oh my god, an 11-year-old fully published that. She edited that. Girl, an 11-year-old wrote a book and I was 10 and I was like, whoa, shit, I only have 1 year before my time is up. Like I'm not even being dramatic. That was genuinely how I felt. So as a 10-year-old, I started trying to write books, which were basically almost copies of what I was reading. Like I would read some crazy fantasy novel and then my book would be like in Erisad. I don't know. It would be like almost the exact same, which is funny. Anyway, the reason I bring this up, the reason I went down that tangent is because being a bookworm and writing these books and being so obsessed with books definitely was not cool. And I don't know whether it was because I was trying to hide it, but I did not show the same enthusiasm for books at school. Like at school, I was pretty sporty, I cared about fashion, I had loads of friends, I wanted to fit in with certain people. I definitely did not show just how obsessed I was with reading. And this seems to be similar to the experience of Kern Carter. I read his essay on Substack. He said the following: as a lifelong reader myself, I still remember the days when I hid the fact that I read and wrote books. I grew up in the 90s when being called a nerd wasn't as celebrated as it is today. In fact, being a nerd dampened your social experience, and without any social media to escape to back then, if your direct environment was chaotic or anxiety-inducing, you were trapped in nerd hell. In relation to performative reading, he said, as much as I appreciate this shift in perception, much of it feels aesthetic instead of intellectual. We've arrived at a place where appearing to be a reader has overshadowed reading. And although I can relate to this experience, as I said before, I do want to caveat that I think that reading may have had sort of an uncool flavor in school, but the connotations of being a bookworm have never been wholly negative. I mean, you can look at the media even back then and TV back then, where you've got characters such as William Thacker from Notting Hill, Rory Gilmore from Gilmore Girls, and then kind of on the other end, a sort of more maths obsessed persona like Good Will Hunting. All of these characters, it was an intentional choice for them to be heavily intellectual or obsessed with books or obsessed with maths. It almost adds to their character as endearing. And also, not that being a reader necessarily indicates intellect. I think that the mainstream perception is that being a reader does mean you have some sort of academic intelligence. And academic intelligence and excellence are certainly not frowned upon in capitalist societies. In fact, they're highly valued. And from this perspective, I think that the declining literacy rates suggests that being perceived to have this academic quality is perhaps a little bit harder to achieve these days. And because it's harder to achieve, it's sort of got this more aspirational quality. In Carter's essay, he goes on to quote an article for The Atlantic, which was written this year, entitled "The Elite College Students Who Can't Read Books." Essentially, the article outlines that US college professors from elite schools such as Columbia are finding that their students are less willing and able to read books than previously. Professors are asking their students to read books within a week or two, and students are outright refusing, saying that they never had to read books before in high school. The article quotes, 20 years ago, Professor Dames's classes had no problem engaging in sophisticated discussions of Pride and Prejudice one week and Crime and Punishment the next. Now his students tell him up front that the reading load feels impossible. It's not just the frenetic pace. They struggle to attend to small details while keeping track of the overall plot. Now, while this article is really fascinating and definitely highlights an inability to maybe grasp these concepts due to lower literacy rates. Personally, I think it also speaks to the lack of time that many students are experiencing. So this takes me to my next point, class and leisure time. As a law graduate, I totally understand the experience of being allocated hundreds and hundreds of pages of reading from different classes, and I'm noticing that a lot more of us are also working full-time or part-time jobs to support ourselves. I was working full-time in my last year of study and part-time almost the whole way throughout. So being allocated this reading was quite frankly impossible. I got to the point in my final year where I really could not tackle most of the material simply because I did not have time. In a cost of living crisis, the number of students who are having to take on part-time or full-time jobs while they're studying is increasing significantly, and the level of spare time that we have as students is decreasing as well. Time is more scarce, so the ability to engage in an activity that requires lots of spare time is basically reserved for less time precious people. And generally speaking, people with more time on their hands in a cost of living crisis tend to be people who are less financially strained. The notion that reading is reserved for the upper class or people with large amounts of leisure time does seem a little bit dramatic. It's actually an idea that's been floating around for a little while. In fact, if you have a look at Veblen's theory of leisure class, it unpacks this concept that flexing your spare time and trivial activities that you might do in your spare time, such as taking a Latin class, which is a language that you can't really use anymore, is an indicator of wealth. The theory of leisure class states that lavish expenditure of scarce and valuable resources such as money and time can act as a signal of status and wealth in the eyes of others. So returning back to TikToker Notes from Kayla's video, which sparked my whole interest in this topic, so thank you so much. I'm going to leave her credits down below. She made a video arguing that not having an online presence is going to be more of a flex in the next coming years. To back up her argument, she spoke of this article that she read in The Atlantic, which was written by Caitlin Tiffany. Essentially, it's called A Radical Approach to Reclaiming Your Attention, and it follows Tiffany's decision to take a 6-week intensive digital detox course in New York. It teaches parents and other caretakers how to rediscover the joy of undivided attention and help your family to do the same. Now, Tiffany disclosed she didn't have any children. She was actually just going to see whether or not it would benefit herself personally. But most strikingly from this article was the detail that the course cost $560 to attend. And obviously, as a result, a very specific class of person was attending the courses and another class of people was not. Now, what I think is really interesting is this whole concept that being able to detox from your phone and detox from the digital world requires something as significant as a 6-week intensive course that costs hundreds of dollars. A very Black Mirror world if only the elite can access a world offline. This concept was then built on by Zara from Taboo on the Bus, where she spoke about the value in rarity. She essentially said that having an online presence is losing value as it becomes more and more accessible.
Having like a big presence online used to be a rarity. It used to be really only accessed by like the elitist media presences, therefore that was so valuable. But now we pretty much all have access to internet fame, to having a platform online, that I think the new value will be derived in being like inaccessible. Like we're even starting to see this in how it is becoming like a luxury to be off-grid, offline. Like you'd get a cabin in the middle of the woods on Airbnb that had no Wi-Fi, no service, and they would use that as like a luxury selling point. They'd be like, oh, it's an unplugged cabin. It's as it's become accessible, as even just like the internet is taking over all of our lives, it's become a luxury to be unplugged.
And this is exactly why I decided to make this video, because while there does seem to be this underlying trend favoring long form content and maybe more nuanced content through performative reading or reading in general, it doesn't really seem that short form content is declining. It seems these two things are kind of happening side by side, but different groups of people get to occupy the different spaces. And particularly where we've got celebrities overtly reading books, whether or not they're actually reading them, we'll never know. Well, we can guess, but we've also got these really serious declining literacy rates and phone addictions. It does create this weird dichotomy. And this brings me to my last point, which is health and wellness. I think that one of the attractive qualities of being offline and reading a book is its link with the digital detox, which, as we all know, is linked to mental health and well-being. As I've spoken about, being chronically online, we all know it's not good for us. Gen Z is hyper aware that it's not good for them. Most social media users are aware of the dangers of social media. Gen Z is one of the most health conscious generations at the moment. In fact, in research by an organization called McKinsey, which was a study of 5,000 people across China, the UK, and the US, they found that Gen Zers and millennials are now purchasing more wellness products and services than older generations. And I think this speaks to the commodification of the wellness industry. It's not necessarily actual health that we care about. It's the markers of health. It's the appearance of health and wellness that has Gen Z hooked on this idea. It's aesthetic green smoothie powders instead of eating broccoli or spinach. It's red light masks, detox teas, it's raw milk. Trends like that girl, which idolize women who go to Pilates, then go for a hot girl walk, then journal all before 6 a.m., then eat their salads, their green smoothies, switch off all technology by 9 p.m. and have a 10-step skincare routine, demonstrate this idolization of the appearance of health without necessarily showing whether or not that person is actually healthier than another person who just kind of goes about their day without being so fixated on the aesthetic of appearing healthy. I think also the pandemic has a lot to do with this. I mean, the entire world was health conscious for a number of years there, and those years also just happened to coincide with Gen Z's formative years. So I do think there's a big link between the pandemic and health consciousness among Gen Z. But I have to question why reading and the appearance of being offline would be any different to this trend. We all know that being online is seriously damaging our mental health. Being offline therefore holds connotations of being healthy, even if it's just an aesthetic of doing so. The digital detox even has been commodified through expensive retreats and digital detox tourism. I came across this journal article which basically described digital detox tourism as follows. In the tourism context, tourism products have rebranded offline status during vacations as digital detox holidays and digital detox camps. It has become a growing marketing trend that promises to provide tourists with a rich sensory, emotional, cognitive, and relationship experience through digital-free activities in digital-free environments. I've never said digital so much in my life. I'm not necessarily saying that the publishing and book industry is one and the same with the wellness industry, but I do think the attraction to both, especially the appearance and aesthetic side of things, have a very similar undertone. Summing up this video, I really want to reiterate that the appearance of reading and the aesthetic of reading and performative reading, whatever you want to call it, isn't necessarily bad if it genuinely is bringing more people to reading. I know that the effect of book talk has seen significant increase in people choosing to read instead of going on their phones, and I didn't really talk about book talk much in this video because it didn't quite fit, but I think that's a really positive takeaway from seeing more people reading online. I think we have to have this conversation together with declining literacy rates and phone addictions and dependence though. I think that as we see more and more celebrities performatively reading and being offline, it does raise these really interesting questions about who gets to be offline and who gets to participate in those activities. I just find it fascinating when we see celebrities adopt behaviors like holding a book and pretending to read or reading. It highlights some things about our culture, such as our chronic onlineness, and it highlights just how bad the problem actually is. Anyway, I think that's kind of all I have to say. I would absolutely love to hear what you have to say about this, because I think that it's a really interesting topic. There are so many things that I didn't talk about in this video. I wouldn't be opposed to continue on this trend of kind of reading. I think it's really fascinating. As always, if you enjoyed this episode and you're listening on Spotify, please rate my podcast. It really, really helps. And if you watch this on YouTube, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, because I'm going to be posting a lot more frequently from here on in. If you want to see more videos from me, I have a playlist of video essays that you can go and check out. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you in my next video. From the Diving Board is a show hosted by me, Charlie Chats, dedicated to decoding digital culture by unpacking the hidden politics behind the screen.